Okay, let's start. A very good morning and welcome to Showcasing Strengths to Your Students. A slightly different take on this month's webinar was also diving into the assessment space. So you've obviously been used to us talking about development over the strengths profile. And what we're going to be doing is showcasing that towards the end and really helping you think about what strengths-based assessment looks like so you can help strengthen your students. So please bear with us over the next half an hour. We've got loads to get through, but with that we'll always be welcoming your questions and your chat. You naturally get muted as you come on board. That's our IT department and best practice. So if there's anything that you want to just raise your hand, you can take yourself off mute and ask questions. We'll also do a bit of Q&A at the end. So I do want to hear from you any challenges or questions that you have throughout the webinar as well. I think since the last time we spoke, I may have changed my name. It's still me, Ward Bailey, now Julie Bateman, and I look forward to spending the next half an hour with you. As I said, we're going to mention a little bit more around the sort of approach to strengths-based assessment, because without that, I guess it's the background you can give your students, why organisations are doing it and what it might look like, how you might come across different things within the assessment space around strengths. We're also going to be looking at interviews and helping you get prepared for strengths-based interviews. I'm going to be looking at then how strengths profile feeds into that process and how you might give them a few tips to be prepared across any assessment that they have. Anna, did you want to just ask the question? I can see a tick next to your name. Are you all right? I will assume so. Okay, so a little bit of an overview about how assessment feeds into what we do here at CAP. So I guess whether you're someone that's got a role in career development, naturally you might think that sort of within a university or that kind of setting, or career coach, perhaps you work in an organisation within career coaching, but really if you develop people, it's really helpful to know about how this links to the side of assessment. So I guess anyone who simply wants to know insight into strengths-based recruitment, so you can help your people that you work with on a day-to-day find the right fit, match that well to the perfect job. So please do bear with us as we start to think about assessment, but it's really important how that links and feeds into the development space. So at CAP, we've got many things that we do around the assessment space. You'll see strengths profile sits there right at the end. But we look at strengths-based attraction, how we attract people to an organisation for our clients is very strengths-based. There'll be pre-application screening. So there might be video interview, might be the first stage screening. Then there's formal interviews. Face-to-face assessment centres, feedback, induction, all of those will involve a strengths-based lens or angle to it. One of the latest reports that's just come out to show us actually that 41% now of organisations are using a strengths-based approach in their recruitment. So I guess, whether you work with students or you're a career mover, you might not necessarily be a student, but someone who's looking to move your career. Or again, many organisations we work with who just help people find the right fit within the existing organisation that they work for, and helping you get that prepared. But 41%, it's a number that's constantly on the increase. It's very likely, whether a student or not, you're going to sort of come across an organisation throughout the recruitment process, going to be looking at strengths of some form or another. And even if you're not, then continuing to sort of develop your people around strengths, helping them find the right role, will sort of spread the word of strengths as well, helping their friends, colleagues, family members get prepared for strengths and the world of recruitment around strengths as well. So I just wanted to touch on the benefits of a strengths-based assessment. I mean, why would we work in that space and why would our organisation, what are the benefits the organisations get, but also what are the benefits for students, those looking for careers, how can they benefit from being part of a strengths-based assessment? So one of the big pieces that we work extensively with our clients is around the fairness. So there's no adverse impact when we look at strengths, and that will become a little clearer as we start to talk about the methodologies of strengths-based. But we've got quite a bit of data and lots of case studies on our website, so I won't spend too long here, but Barclays, EY, Severn Trent, Nestle, with all some great stats around the adverse impact and how we've been able to help recruit more women. Or Barclays think it was no discernible differences in the talent scores across gender, ethnicity or social mobility. So It's a real, going into the assessment process is very, very fair. The candidate experience is just awesome. We continually receive this feedback because they get to really learn about themselves. From the word go, it's talking about the things that they're good at, the passion. Even the feedback at the end is very much on being able to even isolate some of the strengths that they were really passionate about that came through on the day or the interviews, and those perhaps very individual strengths that we can feed back on as well, perhaps that they weren't so high on. So they, from the word go, they really learn about themselves throughout the experience. It's also around the realistic job preview is part of that as well. So you really get to learn about the employer and the role. Most of our assessments are very day in the life. The scenarios that we've taken are people that are already doing the job. So once you go into a strengths-based situation, very much around taking the opportunity, if you're the candidate, the student, to not only just learn about the employee but the role as well. So those two have come across in all of our data as being really strong. This is something new, this candidate is customer, something that we're hearing more and more. Our organisations that we're working with want to impress the candidate. And this is kind of a saying that we're hearing that we're really enjoying. And it's about the brand and the impact. So I guess those organisations that may have 10,000 people who will apply, that's 10,000 people that they could affect really positively about their brand. So that's one of the things that strengths-based recruitment can really help with. So those that are looking for, or students that are in the process of strengths and have a strengths-based recruitment will often come away saying, even if the role wasn't for me, I really want to work for that organisation, maybe I can find a different role. And something authentic is what we're talking about more and more with clients as well. People, at the end of the strengths-based assessment, is about understanding people at their natural best. So, thinking about people sort of self-selecting themselves out of roles as well here. So, the role doesn't, the employer doesn't feel right, the culture doesn't feel right, the job isn't quite right for me. I'm at my best in this interview. Be something that can really, really shine through. So all of our assessments have got this kind of authenticity woven into it, and that really helps support the students or the career candidate. Think about, actually, is this role right for me? So there are many benefits to strengths-based assessment. I've tried to weave some in that actually suit around the organisation and the student, but if that's something that kind of you're interested in knowing more about the specifics of 21% hires have X, Y, Z, then there are many case studies on the CAP website. I'm just going to pause for a moment before we start getting a little bit more practical, just to check whether there are any questions. So Annie raised whether you can hear me. Can I just check that others can hear me okay? If you can chat through, that would be really helpful. Okay, so let's come on to the types of a strengths-based assessment. So again, helping your students or those that you're working with become more equipped as to what they might face out there in the world of strengths-based assessments. So the first stage is the screening. So here in a typical sort of, I'd say typical and an average client that might go for end-to-end strengths-based assessment, these are kind of three ways in which we'll be looking at this, the screening. So it's video interviews. And more we're doing those video interviews than we are telephone interviews now, so be prepared or help your clients think about what that might look like in terms of a video interview. It's very as common as it is. We really encourage candidates to treat these like proper interviews. Get dressed up, even though it's a video interview. Treat it, be formal as you can be in that video process. If you're doing it in your bedroom, which is okay, tidy up your bedroom first. Think about the environment that you're in and get yourself in that mode of being in an interview, even if it's just video. So situational strengths test you may come across, which is scenario-based. Again, gives candidates a real sense of what it would be like to work there, giving you realistic scenarios that you can score according to what you would do. and again, looking for very specific strengths. And immersive is something that we're seeing more and more as well, so you might find your candidates are coming in and doing a world of kind of different assessments within one assessment. Again, it's all about the narrative being taken on the journey of what it's like to work there. So that's something that we and our clients are doing more and more of. When it gets to the assessment centre itself, we'll come on to the interview and give you some hints and tips around that to support your candidates. But it's around the strengths-based interview, biographical interview maybe as well, and technical exercises. Strengths-based areas, there will be the group exercises and presentations. And again, more and more clients are now entering into the strengths-based VR. So here, as an example, I think I may have failed dismally on this one. You might have something like, we're measuring for courage, and you might have, can they walk off a cliff? Can they do it with prompting? Can they do it no prompting? Or did they, were they able to do it, or were they not able to do it? So we're looking at different scenarios here, and it's been really popular being able to have, again, candidate experience, being really enjoying the process of VRA assessment. Again, I just pause there. Any questions? I'm going to come on to the strengths piece. Just turn my microphone up a little. So the types of organisations that we're working with as well, our client partners in the strengths-based assessment and development space, are a real wealth and diversity of organisations here. I'm really proud to be working with these organisations in the different sectors. But all of these will form some form of strengths-based assessment within the work that we do. And again, the reason I share this with you is those who are perhaps working more in the university or career development space, it's very, very likely as you prepare or coach around careers that the people that you're working with are going to come into some kind of contact with someone that runs a strengths-based assessment process of some form. And again, if you're interested in more of those, we have them on our website. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of the differences between strengths versus competencies here. I guess the biggest one I wanted to sort of highlight, or in summary, so competencies demonstrate that level of ability, whereas strengths will assess for the ability plus the energy and the motivation to do the role. So in summary, if that's what it's saying, we can come on to some of these points as we go through things like interviews, but probing is really important as well, so it becomes a lot fairer. But they're not based just then on past experience, but with good strengths. We're very much looking to what the potential is of the candidate rather than perhaps the stories of how they've done it in the past. Those of you that know strengths profile, of course, we're starting to tap into the unrealised strengths space here as well. So I want to spend just a little bit of time looking at the strengths-based interviews, because that's the most popular, I guess, that you can, as coaches, can help prepare your students for career moves for. They're all about getting people in the right roles through that conversation. So what do they look like then? So they, as I mentioned, they focus very much on potential. So using that profile, which we'll come on to shortly, the development space of people within how to use a strengths profile to prepare for the strengths-based interview. So this is kind of the nuts and bolts, what it will look like for them at the time. So they're very much thinking about what they want to do in the future, and that's when the profile can really come in. It's designed to identify candidates with the real energy for the role. Again, that sort of passion, that motivation. I've always wanted to work here. I've always wanted to be involved in retail. Ever since I was X, I've wanted to do this. That's the motivation that we're looking for here. So there might be around 60 minutes, would be a typical length of an interview, but there are more questions. They do fire at you quite quickly. There are three types of questions. You say the warm-up that will help us kind of assess the individual before we start before we kind of do the scoring, and then we'll have the forced responses and the yes or no's, and also what would you do the scenario. So people do say that it's quite difficult to prepare for a strengths-based interview based on the different types of questions. It's not just what would you do. No prompting, and that's the bit that often people come away quite surprised. So, typically competency-based interviews, you'll be asking, can you tell me a bit more about that? What does that look like? Whereas we're taking your answer at sort of face value of the very first answer you give us. There will be no prompting. The assessor just allows you to talk. So that's a really important piece. Occasionally people come away thinking that they can be a little abrupt, quite fast-paced, and they're allowed to be fast-paced because there's no prompting. So as soon as the candidates finish, we go on to the next question. So it can be perhaps even up to 22, 3, 4 questions per strengths-based interview, and quite fast-paced. And I've given you some examples around the questions there that you might come across, that you can start to think about. So it's very much around not just what have I done, but feelings to something, and how you might look at something in the future, or your approach, your attitude. How important is taking ownership to you, giving you scope to really talk about why something is important to you. Before we move on, any hands or questions on strengths-based interviews? Okay, so starting to come on to the actual strengths piece now then, the bit that most of you, names I recognise, being accredited practitioners of strengths profile. So this is the bit that you can really start to shape around and supporting people moving forward. So when I see the stats like this, I think, really helping people understand their strengths before they come into that process is where we can really support them from a development perspective. And and again, it's not just taking strengths profile or understanding your strengths as a student. It's any career move throughout your entire world of work. Is thinking about each time, what are the new things that are available to me? How my strengths help shape my future? What are the things that I've learned throughout my career that I don't enjoy doing now? Drawing on some of those learned behaviours. So just got a question here from Maria. Do you always start questions about a candidate's CV in the beginning, or just go straight to the strengths-based questions? So often there may be a biographical interview first, so that's something that sort of might come under the technical side within a strengths-based assessment. But the strengths-based interview is very much a separate piece that's on its own, where we'll fire these kind of 20-24 strengths. But what we're generally looking for here is maybe 8 to 10 different strengths, and from that we're looking at a couple of strengths per question, a couple of questions per strength. So again, there may be a CV-based interview as well and biographical, but the strengths-based is very separate. So let's start to look at the profiles. Again, most of you hopefully will know strengths profile. Most of these questions as well, though, you can look at without a strengths profile. And I've got a little slide at the end I can show that can help you around that. But here's looking at profiles and thinking within each quadrant, what are the questions, or how can I help shape, how can I prepare my students or my career moves, those looking for new roles, in the middle of their life. Maybe they're about sort of 5 years away from retirement and are looking for a career move that really kind of helps give them more purpose. And these are all questions that you can really help think about careers and your profile. So I'm not going to read through all of the questions here, but what you really want your student or career move person is to be able to talk naturally about the things in any process. So in all of the different ways, whether it's interviews, assessments, even a biographical, or even just walking in the door and making conversations with the receptionist, being able to show your strengths from the minute you walk into the process is really important. So what you want to be able to help them with is think about the history of their strengths, why they're really important to them, where they've come from, the journey that they've been on, the challenges that they've had with those particular strengths. What they've achieved with them is a bit more obvious, but their feelings towards them. Why is it important that authenticity is something that's right for you? Helping them to really reflect on their profile and think, whilst having some stories about achievements around strengths, to actually really get to the bottom of why that's important, what it achieves for others, what it achieves for themselves, how they feel when they've done something in that space. These are all kind of ways in which the stories of their future can unfold, as well as the stories of what they've done now, thinking that I've always done this, I've always been really passionate because these are the types of things that I can achieve when I'm using this. It's also really important in this space around the real life strengths to help people think about maybe those strengths that they've taken for granted a bit more. So let's take some, I've mentioned it just then, authenticity or humour. Your role is to help them see the value of every strength that they have, perhaps including those that they may feel that they're not as valued. But why is it important to be me? What are the things I've achieved in life, thinking about authenticity, that because I've been me, I've really stood up to? What are the things that have helped a situation, a challenge, because I was me in that situation? So draw on all of the strengths. They're an opportunity to think about stories, history, and challenges towards them all. And again, particularly those being strengths, and those that know strengths profile, well, these are the moral compasses, the missions, the legacy, the curiosity, those ones that talk about maybe me at the heart of me, and being able to actually value those and talk about those as well. You'll usually find a wealth of different strengths are being assessed in any environment. You won't know what they are, so being you at your best is all you can ask your candidates and students to do. So help them really appreciate their uniqueness, but then be able to express it. And they don't need to necessarily be very articulate. It's about bringing that passion to those interviews. On the flip side, it is important to help people think about what they don't want out of their careers, or perhaps what they can make do with, or perhaps what's good in their toolkit, what's their use. For those again that know SP will very much talk about the learned behaviours as perhaps the competency framework here. So learned behaviours, they achieve the outcome, but they can leave you drained for long periods of time in a role. So helping people to really explore of your learned behaviours, which ones leave you exhausted and why is that? Which ones perhaps could you tap into in a role going forward when you needed to? Which ones do you really not want to see popping up in your role? Maybe there are different contexts to which you'll, so an example might be often we find writer as a learned behaviour in students when we're working with them because of the amount of writing that they've had to do recently. You may find in the context of a role where they're required to write as and when needed, it's slightly less draining. Just reading a question here around CVs. So how are strengths looked for in a CV? Usually based on more competencies. So at CAT we don't look at CVs. It's very much application based, asking the right motivational questions. So when we're working with an organisation, CVs, absolutely, you're right, wouldn't necessarily be taken into it from a strengths-based perspective. If there's certain criteria that's required off of that CV in terms of technical capability, that would go into the application. But all of ours are very much online applications, questions, scenarios, interviews, where we're not looking at CV. Certainly EY and Nestle, those of you that know us well will know that it's just end-to-end strengths-based assessments for the role, and they've been able to not look at things like A-level results, but just look at different types of assessments for the successful applicant for those roles. So thank you for that question, Anne. And again, weaknesses, occasionally there can be context, but what are the deal breakers here if you had to use more of them? If you ever used them in the past, really helping them think about where their weaknesses sit in terms of how their roles going forward. And of course, this can be for anyone, not necessarily students, someone looking for a career that maybe have used their weaknesses in their role, really thinking about, is that the place that they want to be? You may find some people also asking questions around, what are the things I should know about you, or do you have any weaknesses? I would again use this terminology, be honest, but then also maybe think about what are the strengths that you've got that can compensate for those, or what it is that you've learned to do to overcome the weaknesses that you have. But again, don't be afraid to use that language here if you need to. So in terms of preparation on the day, there's not a huge amount that you can do except what we've sort of really spoken around the strengths and the stories and the history, really thinking about, how so they can express that passion. I mean, again, there are some things here we've put together in terms of preparation. So I don't think I think it's okay to be yourself, because in an ideal situation, you're self-selecting yourself out of the role if it's not for you. You're not going to be happy. It's all about finding the right fit for yourself. Be prepared for those questions. As I've mentioned a couple of times, they are very promptly delivered and there are many of them. So it's almost sort of composing yourself, getting ready for them. And that's again the preparation that they can do is have those stories, have the history, have the examples, have the feelings, chat to their parents, colleagues, friends, to help them, to give them examples about when they've seen them at their best using a particular strength, because they may have thought about something that was a little more hidden, particularly if you're looking at more of the maybe relating strengths, how they've used their compassion, how do they build relationships, what is it that they do that their friends and colleagues really appreciate, and the way that they build those relationships. So get them to talk to as many people as they can in advance to share a different light on their strengths. You start to think about your feelings, and you try to respond with your first thought. We are looking for a fairly prompt answer in terms of that honesty. It all gets marked on a strengths-based assessment. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be articulate, but the right terminology or the right words need to have been expressed in some form. In terms of learning, it's really important that you're assessing them as well as they're assessing you. It's just the type of organisation that you want to work for. Use it as an opportunity to understand more how you'll fit in the culture. Often we're asking culture-based questions as well. Get them to think about their body language as well. So be attentive, consider your tone. Don't sit there with your arms crossed and your legs crossed and kind of slumped. Look confident, be confident, and think about how you're coming across as well. So not suggesting, if you're slightly more introverted, that you're packing your hula hoop for the session, but really just thinking about how you're coming across with what you're doing, wearing, saying, and your sort of approach to questions. Be friendly. Think about from the minute you walk in the door of an organisation to when you leave. Think about that you could be on sort of you could be in an assessment there. How you approach the receptionist, how you are at lunchtime talking to the other candidates. Consider your your approach the whole time through, and also enjoy it. So by the end of week where we're with candidates all day, at the end of it they are exhausted. Don't get me wrong, but they usually really enjoy it. They've learned about themselves. They've learned heaps about the organisation, so whether they get the role or whether they decide it's not for them, they very much enjoy the process that they've just been through. So I'm just going to pause there. I've just got a question here that I'm going to go to. So I did showcase more logos there on that partners page. So over the next couple of weeks, what we can do to anyone that's on the call is also send the slides through, so you can have a copy of those slides where you can find that updated list of everyone that's kind of using a strengths-based assessment. So the clients that I showed may be assessment or development, but anyone that's using a strengths-based approach. So thank you for that. Well, the one other slide I just wanted to share with you was just, if you're not using Strengths Profile, then that's fine. We're all here about learning. These are some questions, and again, it will be in the slide pack. It's just to help them think about their strengths outside of the profile themselves. But some of these questions might be helpful to explore within the context of the profile as well. So I'm exactly out of time. I'm going to say thank you. I've got another question here. I'm just going to answer, but if you do need to leave, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. What was a classic application form questions be for strengths? The same as interviews or not? Are these so quick fire? So application will typically be something around, will be interviews, will be questions. Our applications here are outside of technical capability that might be assessed. Will be things like, screening process will be the video interviews, and will be our strengths-based scenarios as well, what we might do in certain situations. And there may be some form of sort of mini questions that they need to fill in, or even with the video interviews, they might be expected to fill in something about what they can see on the screen, what they might do in that sort of, what they can see as a presentation or a logo or a situation or some kind of image-based, what we call a photo book video interview, where they've got to comment and showcase maybe an answer that's right for that. So different ways, but typically, sort of application forms from strengths-based assessment are few and far between. It's very much sort of situational and video-based, interview-based. So just one more question here. How do you ensure the interviews are accessible? Some students are not natural speakers or show enthusiasm. So very much around, yeah, absolutely great question. So strengths-based approaches aren't always about just being able to sort of rah, rah, look at me. We are also looking at so many other things. Those of you that have been involved in maybe our strength spotting exercises over time, and it's not just about it's not just about, as you say, the motivation. So we're also looking at, things like the detail of the question that you're kind of responding. How often you're doing it. When was the example that you've given us? Maybe how long ago it was. There are many different ways in which we're looking here at demonstrating a strength rather than just motivation. Motivation through language, as well as motivation through the response and how you've responded here. And a lot of our technical assessments as well do take into consideration for different disabilities as well. Some great questions, thank you very much. I will absolutely send those slides. So I think I've answered the one as well from Elizabeth around the quietly passionate. So that's very much around, and also the detail, the response, the type of response, how often. But it's also about the fact that we've come to some kind of informal assessment first. So the warm-up questions, we're really looking to assess what they're like before we're assessing them. So if you ask someone about their day, and then they're naturally very quiet but expressive, we kind of know that that's the way that they're going to respond. But also we don't mark or measure until we finish the whole of the interview so that we can see the spikes. So even if you're not naturally really extroverted, and that's absolutely fine, over a space of 20 questions we'll be able to spot the sort of the highs and the lows within those 20 questions to be able to kind of see, even if you're not naturally expressive, you will have come alive at certain points. The questions that went on for a 3-minute answer rather than a 2-minute answer. So I hope that was helpful. Can't see any more questions. Please do keep coming. So I'm going to turn off the recording now. If there are any questions, keep them coming. You know where we are afterwards following the event as well. We'll send the slides around to you. They will be shortly on the website, but in the interim we will pop those over to you as well. Thank you very much for joining us today then. It's been great to talk to you about something slightly different outside of Strengths Profile, but still with a link about how it can be really useful helping those next stage career moves. We look forward to being in touch soon.